Welcome to our webinar, Driving Growth for Your Business, presented by BlueSnap. Before we get started today, just a couple of logistics. First, we will be recording today's webinar, and we will send you a post-event link. Also, if at any time you have questions for myself or Mark, please submit your questions in the question box to the right of your screen. We will do our best to get to everyone's questions, but if we are unable to do so during today's discussion, we'll be sure to follow up with you post-event. And also, we want to hear from you. So we will be running a poll at the end of our discussion to talk a little bit about, or we want to hear from you about how you plan to drive business growth with payments. So be ready to participate. Now let's get started with some introductions. I'm April Grudier, Vice President of Marketing here at BlueSnap, and I'm very excited to be here today with Mark Thomas, a top payment strategist here at BlueSnap. How are you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing well, April. Thanks for having me.
I noticed on your social that you were posting about the webinar and you were talking about how you were ready to nerd out about payments.
Yeah, always fun to talk payments when the opportunity arises, so I'm excited for this. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. So I stole that. I am also ready to nerd out about payments, and that is not something I ever thought that I would say in my professional career. So I'm ready to nerd out with you.
Let's nerd out.
All right. Well, I'm really happy you're here today because we have been working on 2022 predictions, and we found some really exciting payment trends that have come to surface. So let's go back a little bit to coming out of the pandemic. So coming out of the pandemic, we experienced a lot of change over the last couple of years, and businesses were on an accelerated journey to digitalization and looking for new paths to revenue. So a big shift that businesses are beginning to see is that payments can play a really strategic role in that growth. This runs the gamut of optimizing payments for new markets or for selling cross-border, increasing conversions, or even for software platforms to embed payments into their offering to increase revenue per customer. And so our predictions speak to both merchants and vendors leveraging payments to sell direct to their customers, as well as software platforms who are selling payments as a service to their clients. So, Mark, just a few things to think about before we jump in is, when you talk to businesses about payments, can you share a little bit about what they're looking for? Are they looking to process payments to sell their goods and services, or are they platforms looking to embed payments to process for their customers? And at what point does driving growth come into the conversation?
Yeah, it's a good question, April. We see both scenarios. With companies who are looking to process payments to sell their goods and services, the topic of driving growth typically comes into play quite early in the conversation, as today's companies are far more educated about payments than ever before, right? Most have done the research on ways to optimize payments, and they know there's a better way, but in some cases, they just don't exactly know what that means. We typically see businesses looking for ways to reduce vendor debt, technical debt, all while simultaneously looking for a more robust solution that can support their go-to-market goals. Some of the most common features and functionality that I see companies looking for are local acquiring in multiple regions, the ability to present currencies and language dynamically by region, ways to automate accounts receivable, the ability to offer local payment methods that are the most popular by region. It really runs the gamut, but all of these features and functionalities and capabilities, when combined and used in an orchestrated fashion, can be a game changer as it relates to allowing them to drive growth in different markets. We also talk to software companies that want to embed and integrate our technology into their platforms in order to provide a payment service to their customers. In that world, growth comes in two different ways. I think the first way is embedding payments enhances the platform offering. It makes the company more valuable to their existing customer base, but also more attractive to net new customers. So in turn, it can kind of solve two problems, right? The first is it can help reduce customer attrition as the platform offerings are now strengthened, all while attracting net new customers that maybe the platform wouldn't have attracted in the first place. And then the second way would be when embedding payments, it allows them to monetize payments, creating a new revenue stream, which in turn grows the overall revenue of the company, therefore, increasing the company's valuation.
So, Mark, that's really interesting, and it gets us started on our first prediction, which is about embedded payments and just the overall popularity that embedding payments in software is gaining. And so, can you tell me a little bit about what BlueSnap is predicting and what the trends you are seeing are around this growing interest of software platforms who are embedding payments into their offering?
Yeah, embedded payments aren't new, but the practice is growing in popularity, right? I mean, people are seeing the value in payments, and many private equity firms and VCs are telling their portfolio companies to embed payments. I think the stat is that research from JP Morgan states that software companies that embed payments into their platform see a 2 to 5 time increase in revenue per customer. So it can be quite substantial. Many companies think they need a complete payment operations division in addition to what they're already doing in order to embark on this initiative. But it's not really the case these days. The reality is that with the right payment partner, they can easily embed payments into their platform. And today, platforms have a lot of options for integrating payments. We see companies come through the front door wanting to get up and running quickly, and they can do that, and we can support them in doing that. We also have companies that are a little bit more mature in payments, and they can take on more responsibility, and they can use us as what we call a payback as a service, the new trend in the market, right? Where you can use our APIs and our back-end technology, but have complete control over the branding and customer experience.
Mm-hmm.
For companies that want to, they can evolve into becoming a full payback themselves. So there is a crawl, walk, run approach and structure that can be enabled, all depending on the company's aspirations. But the real benefit of this model is partnering with someone who knows payments, understands compliance, and is on the forefront of what's next. So you will be too, right? So for example, companies that have global customers today or aspire to, that comes with a lot of currencies, more payment types, more compliance.
Mm-hmm.
It can be hard, like almost impossible to navigate on your own. So choosing the right partner for embedded payments is key.
It sounds like there's a huge opportunity or trend there that is going to go well beyond 2022. But you just mentioned global. And so that brings us to our next prediction is around businesses will seize the global economy to increase revenue. And I think that has come up. We've definitely seen that over the past couple of years as companies are looking for how to reach new customers, how to reach new markets. So, Mark, why do you think more and more companies are trying to seize the global economy, and what are you seeing companies looking for when they're building, that global strategy?
Good question. I think all the digitalization and moving online, especially during the pandemic, has shown businesses that they can now access an entire world of selling if they have the infrastructure to support it. I think one of the most recent stats I saw was that by 2027, cross-border payments will account for $250 trillion. I think it's fair to say that that's a sizable pie for global businesses to want a piece of, and the businesses best positioned to get a piece of that multi-trillion-dollar pie will be those that fully embrace digital payments and are dedicated to making payments simple for their customers, meaning allowing the customers to pay in their local currency, with local payment methods, in their local language, and most importantly, processing those payments in the local country.
Now, yeah, it sounds like there's tremendous opportunity. So in the past 2 years, have you seen, how much of an influx have you seen, and are there any stories that you can share with us about some clients who wanted to grow into global markets and how we've helped them?
Yeah, so I've been here it'll be 3 years in May. So I've seen us work with a lot of really large recognizable brands, the likes of Ford Finance and Outbrain, Wheels Up,
Mm-hmm.
Monday.com, BlackBerry, a lot of publicly traded companies, and a lot of companies that are really large in scale that aren't publicly traded either. But a couple that come to mind is before my time, Monday.com started with BlueSnap as a startup out of Israel, and now they're a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ with, I think 5+ entities all over the world, where we've been able to help them grow into different regions and different markets while optimizing payments, all through the use of one provider. There's the likes of companies that come to us at a different life cycle in their journey, like BlackBerry, for instance. Top of mind because of the meme stock rage with Reddit. BlackBerry came to us looking to streamline process inefficiencies. They needed the ability to present in multiple different currencies and automate AR collections all across the world with multiple different entities, and they needed the ability to get paid out in multiple different currencies and multiple different bank accounts all over the world. And then one of the most recent companies that has an affinity towards, I have an affinity towards, is a company called Skybox Checkout, which is a global logistics provider who have multiple entities all over the world. And they had to present in 60 plus different currencies. I think it's 100 plus different currencies that they needed to be able to present and collect payments in, with all the local payment methods across 26 or 27 different countries. And they needed flexible APIs to meet their payment flow needs by region. And if you think about what they're doing, they're moving trains, planes, automobiles in the background, and that customer payment flow journey takes on a few different paths. So they needed the flexibility to meet their needs in different regions.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, as I think back in my personal experience, I definitely feel as if I'm seeing more international companies, I think target me, but reach out to me, whether it's display advertising or a ton of social commerce, that I'm definitely seeing more EU, UK companies who are trying to sell me shoes or sweaters or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely exploded. But as you go into a global market, this brings us to our next prediction, is that you're going global, but you need to optimize those payments for global growth, and that will be essential. So if you're going to sell internationally, you need to make sure that your payments are optimized for cross-border. So Mark, can you share why there are so many missteps and how companies might be able to navigate that move?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I agree with your previous sentiment. The world is now borderless, right? People are selling all over the world. And I think your question, cross-border fees and authorization rates are typically the problem, and local acquiring is the solution in most cases. It all begins and ends there. I think businesses selling globally need to solve challenges like cross-border fees, low authorization rates, and technical debt issues that can all cut into the profit margin of sales. And cross-border fees alone, which card brands charge for transactions processed outside of the region in which the purchaser's card was issued, can add up to roughly an additional 2% of cost. And these fees can be avoided by localizing the transaction with local acquiring. Having the right processing infrastructure that can not only support local acquiring, but also has failover logic and redundancy within that region, all while routing the transaction intelligently with smart logic, it's a game changer. So when you couple those features with the ability to dynamically present in multiple currencies and offer the most popular payment methods by locality, it really adds up. And presenting in the purchaser's local currency and by localizing the transaction on the back end increases authorization rates significantly.
Yeah, it's authorizations are really what it's all about when it comes to closing that sale and securing that revenue. So that brings us to our next prediction in terms of driving growth, and that's around increasing payment conversions being a key KPI. So Mark, from your perspective, I'd love to hear that, what companies should be looking for at their payment conversions key KPI. And yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple KPIs to track, but if you take a step back and if you think about all the time and energy and money and resources companies spend on not only developing their websites and listing their products and services for sale, but also what it takes to drive customers to those sites in the first place, just to have them abandon the checkout once they get there because the language isn't localized, or they don't see their local currency, or their payment method of choice isn't there. That's a lot of wasted effort and money, and it can be avoided. Or maybe the customer does check out and the transaction gets declined by the bank, right? I think one of the most recent stats I saw was that in 2021, there was $16.3 billion in false declines in the United States alone. So one KPI to track would be website conversions to payment, right? Do my site visitors who end up on my payment page or checkout page actually check out and try to purchase? That's number one. Number two would be, the second KPI would be, I would focus on would be payment, like for instance, the second one I would focus on would be like payment authorization rates and approval rates, for instance, which is when the customer decides to check out and buy, does the transaction actually go through? Are these hard declines or soft declines? Hard declines are the most common, and is when the issuing bank will not validate the transaction, and it's caused by many factors, right? Such as mistyping, insufficient funds, reported stolen or fraud. Those examples of declines will always be declined and should be for obvious reasons. But then there's soft declines on the other hand, which occurs when a transaction has been authorized by the customer's card issuing bank or rejected by the payment gateway or the processor or the acquiring bank due to internal rule settings. An example of this is a currency mismatch where the card was issued in one currency, but the transaction is taking place in another currency. And believe it or not, there's just sometimes the banks just don't like the look and feel of that transaction based on the merchant category code, the time of day, the dollar amount, the currency mismatch, and it can be avoided with having local acquiring and processing the transaction locally and having built-in failover and redundancy.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you make a great point that you spent all this time and your energy finding this new market, setting yourself up for success. You want to make sure that those transactions are going through and you're getting those authorization rates because of that big investment in time and effort. So really, really excellent point. So thank you so much, Mark, for all of these insights. I think this is a great look into how businesses can drive growth with payments in 2022. And as I said earlier, I think the overall shift of businesses looking at payments as strategic and really how can they drive revenue versus it's just a cost center, it's just a cost of doing business. There's nothing that I can do to really make this a positive, profitable revenue driving stream for me. So now that we've done a deep dive into each of these, we'd love to hear from you, the attendees, and are most excited about, and to hear from you about what you're most excited about from what will you be doing to drive growth for your business. So the quiz has popped up, and the question is, how will you use payments to drive growth in 2022? So will you be embedding payments into your software? Will you be moving into new global economies to increase revenue? Will you be optimizing your payments for cross-border? Or will you be looking at different and new KPIs to measure those successes? And again, I just want to remind folks that while you're voting, if you have any questions, definitely put them into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we're happy to answer those. Looks like we have a few more pollsters coming in. All right. All right. So it looks like, focusing on my payments conversions as key KPIs is well into the lead, which is really interesting. And it also echoes something that we had seen in a previous webinar and study that we had done last year about people knowing what their authorization rates were. And I think it was, you'll have to keep me honest, about 40% of companies didn't know what their authorization rates are. And, then in turn weren't able to do anything or react to those. So it seems like people are definitely looking at that as a key driver for this year. And, again, it looks like we have a lot of interest in people who are looking to embed payments into their platforms as well as seizing the global economy to increase revenue. So I think our predictions on seizing the global economy and optimizing those cross-border payments really go hand in hand. Any insights you see from our poll, Mark?
I think it's on par, depending on, I'm not sure which companies or types of companies the attendees represent, but yeah, I think this is on par. I think that 40% number, I actually find it interesting. It feels to me, and this is anecdotal, it feels to me almost that more than 40% of companies don't actually know what their conversion rates are on payments.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what their authorization rates are until you ask them, and then they have to go find it out. So it's interesting, but it's a new world we live in regarding payments, and it's not just a cost center anymore. It's a growth center.
Right. And so Mark, do you run into that in your conversations with merchants and clients, that they don't know some of these key KPIs, and when they go and say, oh, I don't know that, I'm going to look, is there a shock and awe moment of, oh, I didn't realize it was that?
Yeah, there is. And oftentimes, in some cases, folks are programmed to have a race to the bottom mentality, where they're hey, BlueSnap, what's your rates? And then in turn, we'll ask them, well, what's your rates? Meaning not your cost, but what are your authorization rates? Like, how many sales are you losing that you could have gained, and what is the potential lift to your business? It's quite remarkable in some cases. I mean, in some cases, we see an increase of first-time declines from like 15 to 20%. I mean, that's real money.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think hopefully this will be a driver to have people again take a step back and really look at what are those key KPIs. What are my auth rates? What are my conversion rates? What is my cart abandonment? Am I losing sales because I don't have the preferred payment methods, or I'm not in a local language or currency? So Mark, this is a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk through some of the 4 predictions that we have for driving growth for business. I enjoyed nerding out with you. So that was great. And thank you to everyone who joined our webinar. We hope that you found the information useful. And if you want to learn more about our 2022 payment predictions, you can sign up for our webinar series. We have a couple more webinars in queue for the next coming months to talk about our other prediction pillars of elevating the customer experience and improving ROI. And obviously, you can always go to our resource center. There's a wealth of information there. Any payment question or inquiry you have, I'm sure that we have content that could help answer your questions. So again, Mark, thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to chatting with you again. And thank you for our audience for their time and attention, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks for having me, April.